Welcome to the Blackhawk Museum, an affiliate of the Smithsonian Institution. The museum's renowned automotive exhibition presents and displays historically significant and artistically inspired automobiles and examples of automotive art and artifacts, from the very earliest to the contemporary, for public enjoyment and educational enrichment. Thank you for visiting the museum today, and we hope you enjoy this short overview created by the History Channel of the automobile's origin and development during the past 100 years.
From ragtops and convertibles to tail fins, uninspiring box-like designs to sleek aerodynamic wonders, cars have looks to satisfy almost any taste. But all of this attention to form is actually rooted in function. The earliest cars were simply wooden horse carriages with motors. There were no doors, no roofs, not even a windshield. Drivers were totally exposed to the elements. As car speeds went up, engineers raised the sides and added doors. Windshields and carriage-like ragtop roofs became popular after the turn of the century. One of the earliest completely enclosed cars was the 1905 Cadillac Osceola. It was a one-of-a-kind, turn-of-the-century concept car. The closed body idea was very appealing to Cadillac's founder, Henry Leland.
When you look at the car, you can see it has a very tall silhouette, and one of the reasons for that is that Henry Leland was very tall, well over 6 feet tall. Osceola was such a significant innovation to the automobile business that Henry Leland kept that car, and that was his actual personal car that he drove.
However, it took quite a while for closed-body cars to catch on because they were expensive. In fact, closed cars didn't outsell open models until 1927, 22 years later. In addition to offering more protection from the elements, cars were gradually changing their skins from wood to steel. Completely steel bodies appeared as early as 1912, but they didn't dominate the market until the 1930s. Advances in metal shaping set the stage for one of the brightest periods in American car styling. Before the late 20s, more practical engineers had always dictated a car's shape. Well, that changed in 1927, when General Motors placed Harley Earl in charge of the art and color section, the first department in the industry dedicated exclusively to styling. His first GM design was the 1927 LaSalle, which became the pace car for that year's Indianapolis 500.
The styling on the car is very fresh. It has flowing lines, whereas if you look at the earlier cars that were designed by the mechanical engineers, they're very straightforward, more form and function than styling.
Flowing lines came from a process that Earl used over the decades at GM, his idea of clay modeling. Previously, models had been made of wood. Clay gave Earl the freedom to test many different shapes and ideas. It's an innovation that's still in use today. In 1929, the Cord Car Company hired Gordon Burig to supervise the design of its Duesenberg line of cars.
Gordon Burig was really one of the finest designers then. He could design any vehicle and leave off all the trim. It would still be beautiful. It was beautiful in shape, in form. And that's what made his designs so outstanding.
Movie stars like Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, and Mae West happily paid about $15,000 for their doozies, or $153,000 today. With that kind of price tag, it's a good thing the J model is still considered one of the most stylish and opulent cars in American automotive history. Although the Depression sank luxury car sales, advances in body design continued. The 1934 Chrysler Airflow was aptly named since it was the first car designed in a wind tunnel. This allowed the car to slice through the air more efficiently than earlier models. Smaller, sporty cars became popular in the 1950s. In 1953, designers at Chevrolet decided to try out a non-steel body. They used a new type of plastic known as fiberglass to create the highly successful Corvette. Fiberglass made the Corvette light and allowed for stylish curves, but there was also a practical reason for using this material.
It's cheaper to build a low-volume car out of fiberglass. And the reason is, when you make a body out of steel, you have to produce these enormous dies that stamp a flat sheet of steel and produce a fender or a hood or a roof.
The Corvette's fiberglass body was molded on less expensive equipment. Since annual Corvette production has always been in the tens of thousands compared to hundreds of thousands for more common models, Chevrolet saved manufacturing costs with this non-steel body. But fiberglass also helped the Corvette seem new and different. However, 1970s car bodies offered very little in new and different styles. Designers were being pulled in several directions. Safety standards from the government started to prohibit any sharp corners on car bodies. At the same time, the government was requiring higher fuel economy, which increased the need for smaller, lighter cars. But customers didn't want to give up any interior space.
So if you want to make the outside of the car smaller, keep the inside big, well, you make a box. And by the time we got to the late 70s, we had cars with very little chrome on them, very few sharp edges, and extremely boxy shapes.
In recent years, some designers have looked to aluminum as the next body material to unseat steel. Although aluminum is lighter, it's not as easy to shape as steel, and since different metals can't be welded together, it cannot be attached to steel, which is still the most common material for the underlying structure of the car. Due to these limitations, some manufacturers are starting to make certain body panels out of plastic and keep other parts steel. Future stylists may be working with carbon fiber materials. Carbon fiber combines durable plastics and carbon compounds to create a lightweight material up to 35 times stronger than steel. Indy car bodies are made from this advanced material. But with a price tag 10 to 100 times higher than steel, it might stay on the track and out of John Q. Public's garage for years to come. Although early driving was thrilling, it was also dangerous. Before World War I, cars had killed 36,000 people in America. U.S. deaths in the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the Spanish-American War totaled only 22,000. Since early drivers sat high on top of their cars, without doors, finding a way to remain in the vehicle became one of the first safety goals.
Seatbelts actually occurred as early as 1903 when there was a race, one of these high-speed races, and the driver strapped himself in with a belt. And that was the first use of somebody strapping themselves into an automobile.
But seatbelts weren't widely used on consumer models for another 50 years. Since early drivers weren't too concerned about buckling up, having a little cushion during collisions was important. Front bumpers became available as an extra option in 1906. Another safety device which filtered down to the average motorist from racing was the rear view mirror. In 1911, Ray Haroon rigged a mirror on his car and went on to win the Indianapolis 500. By the 1930s, these mirrors became more popular on consumer models. Closed-bodied cars in the 1920s offered motorists more structural strength, but they also raised new concerns about glass. Plate glass in the early models usually broke into long, dangerous shards during accidents, or when attacked by angry baseball pitchers.
It was kind of a scary situation, and in fact, many people in the 1920s refused to ride in closed cars because of the perceived danger of the shattering plate glass.
The invention of safety glass eased these fears. In much the same way as today, manufacturers sandwiched a layer of plastic between two sheets of glass. When it broke, the glass either stuck to the plastic or broke off in small, round, harmless pieces. The 1928 Ford Model A and 28 Cadillacs were some of the very first models to use safety glass. Once windshields were commonplace, windshield wipers had to keep them clean to ensure good visibility. In 1916, drivers had to move the windshield wipers back and forth by hand. A small knob on the inside of the window was attached to the blade on the outside. It was clear that a better system was needed.
Very quickly, some clever engineers discovered that the windshield wiper could be powered by a vacuum motor. This was driven from the vacuum developed inside the engine. The only problem was when you're driving up a hill and you're pushing the engine. The vacuum in the engine drops very low. So you would see vehicles climbing hills in the rain and their wipers would stop operating.
By the 1950s, electric windshield wipers were fairly common, and the older vacuum problem disappeared. Safety belts made a comeback, beginning with the 1949 Nash. They gradually appeared on more cars in the 50s and 60s. Airbags were combined with seat belts to provide even greater safety in the early 1970s. But before they came on the market, researchers struggled to make these complex devices work.
Our first prototype of that was developed in 1971. There were a lot of technical challenges because you're asking some mechanism to fill a bag in a little less than 50 milliseconds. Which is, to give you an idea of 50 milliseconds, you blink your eye and it takes 250 milliseconds.
When the vehicle received an impact, an electronic signal raced to the airbag. A small charge propelled the bag beyond its housing, and a pressurized gas inflator quickly filled the bag. The system worked well, but it was an $800 option when GM introduced it in 1973. Since these cars only cost about $6,000, airbag sales fell flat. They were discontinued 3 years later. They re-emerged in 1987 due to government mandates. They were less expensive and, this time, well received by the public. Since then, airbags have started to pop up in many areas around the interior. Passenger airbags and side impact systems are now fairly common. The newest type is known as a curtain airbag, which expands from the roof and protects the driver if the car rolls over.